So I think that's sort of the easy answer, that everyone could use a coach. And sort of
Right.
the question is more around who's the right coach for you and sort of what do you want to work on, right? And I think for me, the things I'm often working on with people are just helping them see their blind spots, right? So being able to give them feedback to see, hey, here's a dream that I see you sort of edging towards that maybe you haven't fully acknowledged, or here's a strength maybe you don't really see in yourself, but this seems like something you could really build on. Or, hey, maybe here's a growth edge, right? Here's an opportunity. If you got better at this thing, think of what might be possible, what goals you could achieve.
Does everyone need a coach?
I mean, need is an interesting word, right? Because we're all fine as we are. We don't have to have a coach. Of course not. Could we all benefit from a coach?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today we're delighted to have Kenneth Berger on the program. He's a 20-year veteran in tech, first PM at Slack, very cool. Current role as an exec coach. Kenneth, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Would love to get an intro from you for the audience.
Sure. As you said, I spent a long career in tech, in design and product management, but I had a moment where, I'd been a founder, I'd been sort of early at Slack, and so I'd had all the sort of high points of the startup journey, right? Like on a rocket ship, of the founder journey, of raising money, but I'd also had a lot of the low points, right? That I've been fired by my co-founder and sort of let go from Slack, and the very dramatic story I've told elsewhere. So I had sort of had this moment where I had to think about, gosh, like, what do I really want to do for my next step of my journey? Like, what impact do I want to make? Because I had this irony that I had all this opportunity coming out of my background, but I still felt like crap about myself, right? Because I'd been through sort of not just the high points of the journey, but the low, the stuff you don't advertise so much on LinkedIn. And so that was kind of how I found myself edging towards coaching. Because when I looked at all the things I could do, I was like, okay, I can go and be VP product somewhere, but I've been a product person for a long time. And when I thought about what I really cared about, it was this deeper stuff of like, yeah, how do we help people do this work in a way that's more sustainable? So that's what I've been doing for the past 7-8 years.
I love it. And I saw a coach too, multiple times throughout my career. I mean, you basically described, nobody talks about their lows. I mean, I had so many lows. I just really depressed and just, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, I grew up poor, worked really hard, got to Wall Street and washed out, and which I've told the story over and over again on this podcast. For apologies for anybody who's a regular listener, but and then I just went through this like quarter life crisis in my late 20s, just wandering around different jobs and careers and trying lots of stuff. And eventually I found product like you, and that was kind of the best job. If I had to go get a salaried job right now, I'd probably be a PM, but it still wasn't what I would do if I had 10 or 20 million in the bank. I wouldn't go do that tomorrow, right? I wouldn't go build product if I had 100 million in the bank. I'm actually doing what I do, is have this podcast and invest in startups, but for everybody's different. But maybe you can let's dig into a little bit of the background and how it informs your coaching now. Yeah. So what kind of experience do you find yourself leaning on the most?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think some people, especially if they haven't had a coach before, they think, oh, okay, Kenneth is this expert and he's going to tell me how to run my startup and become a unicorn and, how to do my one-on-ones and all that. And, I think that the reality is there's lots of different ways to run a company that are perfectly valid. And none of them are guaranteed that you're going to be a unicorn or decacorn or whatever measure of success you want to say. And so really what I find coaching is more just about knowing oneself and about doing some of this kind of deeper personal development work. Because to me, I mean, part of the way I use my background is just knowing the environment, right? Of like what it's like to be in a high-paced tech company or a fast-growing startup or a not-so-fast-growing startup that wants to be fast-growing. And so I get the context, and a lot of that context is just heavy, heavy uncertainty, right? Like much more so than you get in a traditional job. And I think that a lot of the tools people end up needing to learn are about how to handle that uncertainty to not go crazy, because I think so often we're really, really concerned with trying to control outcomes and say, oh, how do I make sure that I'm successful at this? When there's no guarantees in life in general, and certainly not in startups. And so, lucky for me and for the folks I work with, there's lots of techniques that you can use to help make peace with this. So you can do this work that has a lot of uncertainty and not go crazy in the process.
That sounds really interesting. So how do you usually start with a new client? Like what's the kind of the onboarding process?
Well, for me, the first question is always around change, right? Because I don't go in saying, like you're broken or you have to fix this or this is a problem. I say all my clients are perfect and wonderful as they are. They don't have to change at all. But if you wanted to change, right, what would that change be, right? And so that's the sort of igniting question for me, because once there's the desire for change, right, a preference for like how things could be different, then we can start to explore, okay, how might we do that, right? Like what are the things getting in the way? And often those things are as much or more internal than external. And we can start to work through how do we experiment and week by week figure out how do we move you towards the change you want to make.
And what are the changes that, do you primarily work with founders?
Yeah, I primarily work with startup founders and executives. I'd say the people that report to the founders. And, it's all kind of the classic stuff, right? I think that some of it's, just the uncertainty stuff of like, okay, I want my startup to be successful, but I'm not sure how to do it, right? Like, so what do I do? There's the sort of more managerial stuff, right? Of like, how do I delegate, or how do I give feedback, or how do I resolve conflict with other people? I think conflict and sort of interpersonal relationships important in every job, even more so in that kind of high pressure startup environment. A lot of these folks are first time CEOs, right? They don't necessarily have all these reps under their belt of like, oh yeah, I already know, how to give feedback and how to manage and how to delegate. So we'll go through all that stuff. But then I think there's also just a level of a sort of mental health piece of like, how do you feel day to day? Because I think a lot of people go into startups saying, oh, I'm just going to work as hard as I can. I'm never going to take a break. And, a year or two into it, they're on the path to burnout. They say, I feel awful every day. The other people in my life don't feel like I'm making time for them. And to me, that's the tragedy, to say, oh, that running a tech company has to mean, sort of sacrificing everything else in your life. And it doesn't, right? It's about finding balance in this thing.
Yeah. And how do you, like, for the founders listening out there, like, how do they know they need a coach? I mean, you mentioned some things that they're dealing with. Like, what does that aha moment typically look like for these founders?
I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because I think part of what you work on in coaching, right, is self-awareness. And so sometimes it's hard to know, right? Like, what is the thing, like, how are you going to know that sort of support is useful? So I think a nice shorthand there is support is useful for everyone, right? Like, are any of us an island where we could never use like another perspective on what's going on for us, or, an expert on sort of certain aspects of doing our job that we might be able to learn from? So I think that's sort of the easy answer, that everyone could use a coach. And sort of the question is more around who's the right coach for you and sort of what do you want to work on, right? And I think for me, the things I'm often working on with people are just helping them see their blind spots, right? So being able to give them feedback to see, hey, here's a dream that I see you sort of edging towards that maybe you haven't fully acknowledged, or here's a strength maybe you don't really see in yourself, but it seems like something you could really build on. Or, hey, here maybe here's a growth edge, right? Here's an opportunity. If you got better at this thing, think of what might be possible, what goals you could achieve.
Does everyone need a coach?
I mean, need is an interesting word, right? Because we're all fine as we are. We don't have to have a coach. Of course not. Could we all benefit from a coach? Absolutely.
The way I describe it typically when people say, why do I need a coach? And I've had a couple great ones throughout my career, including just people that manage me, that coach me, right? Is I like to say even Steph Curry has a shooting coach. He's the best shooter ever. And he still has somebody coaching him on how to shoot, which is absolutely crazy, right? You would think Steph Curry has a shooting coach, but yeah, he has a shooting coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why not you, right?
I mean, I do think that aspect of sort of being able to see your blind spots is one thing that's really important, that I think often the folks I work with are really caught up in sort of the day-to-day of their job. So even if they have a moment of self-reflection of like, oh gosh, like what am I working on in myself, right? Like there's not that much time for that. It's hard to have perspective on it. It's hard to get really honest feedback from the people around you. And so I think having someone who doesn't have a vested interest one way or the other and can really just be a mirror to the best of their ability, I think is really valuable in and of itself. And then for me, an additional thing I layer on is I've been working on this book, this project, called Ask for What You Want, right? That's kind of my coaching process, coaching philosophy. And so part of what, part of what I mix in with my coaching is a little bit of teaching of how do you ask for what you want effectively? Because it's something that we all need to sort of move forward in our lives, but usually we're not particularly expert on it. Because why would you focus specifically on building ask for what you want skills when you've got, everything else in your life to focus on?
Yeah. So what are some symptoms of burnout that you've seen, founders listening out there that are kind of feeling it? How do you identify it?
I feel like people talk about burnout like it's this, secret, subtle thing that you need to look for the hidden signs of. And I'm like, no, it tends to be pretty obvious. It's like, do you feel very bad a lot of the time? Do you not want to do your job, right? Do you find yourself caring less and less about the things that were once meaningful to you? I find it tends to not be subtle at all, in a certain sense. And really more, I think the reasons that people miss it are just that deep denial that there's, often a real fear of what would it mean if I didn't work 60, 80 hours a week, right? Like, does that mean it's more likely that I'll fail? And what will that mean about me? What will people say about me? And so it's not so much that they're not aware of it, but that they're believing those fears, right? They're saying, yeah, like I would be ruined. I can't stop doing this. It's a literal physical danger to me. And so really the path out of burnout tends to be to recognize like, yeah, of course we all get scared, right? Like as humans, we have that fight or flight impulse, but we got to check the facts on that, right? And be like, am I actually in physical danger? No. The danger is I have to go and get a boring corporate job, right? Like it's not that bad.
Yeah, that's always the worst case scenario, right? Go get a job. Yeah. Like return capital to your investors and, go get a job. Or actually just start a new company, because we'd be thrilled to see you fail and start a new company, really.
Although I will say in the post-ZERP environment that has changed a little bit, that I think it used to be easy to sort of get a job at Google anytime you wanted. And I think now you do have really talented people being out of work in the tech world for 6 months or a year, and that's something different. But even that, right, like that's not physical danger, right? That's like, okay, like maybe I need to make some different choices about doing a job that's not ideal or it's not what I prefer, if I really need to put money in the bank. And so those, sort of trade-offs are real, but at the same time, it's often not that sort of, life or death feeling that we have when we're in that fight or flight.
And you're describing me right now. Yeah, I mean, I'm a founder of Team Ignite, right? And I left my cushy corporate life a little over a year ago to do this. And yeah, it's a lot, right?
For sure.
What are some strategies to prevent and recover from burnout? And like, what are some good rules of thumb? What's your 5-point plan that you give founders typically? Like, hey, you're probably experiencing some burnout here. Here's the 5 things that you need to start doing, or whatever it is.
Sure. So, I mean, I think number one is listening to the signals your feelings are giving you, right? Because I think, again, we tell this story that burnout is sort of subtle or hard to identify when it's very obvious, right? It's really just that we're actively working to ignore it. So step one is really to just stop ignoring those feelings and acknowledge is the reality that like I feel bad day to day, right? That's I'm not excited to come to work anymore. Then that can usually start a process of sort of self-reflection of like, wow, how did I get here? Like I started this company because I was so excited about achieving this dream. And all of a sudden, like I'm here out of guilt or fear or what have you. And so once we identify that, right, then we can start that process of sort of checking the facts on the fears, right? Because what I find, like when I work with people on sort of achieving what they want, so much of the work is actually just working through fear, right? Of identifying like, yeah, like I'm stuck not because there's anything actually in my way in a real way, but because of my own internal barriers, right? Because I'm scared to take the action that I need to take to move forward. And so that's not to say that's easy, but at least it is empowering in the sense that when the barrier is internal, it's something you can work on yourself and say, yeah, okay, like, I'm having trouble, working less because I'm scared of what it would mean if I could fail. And so then we can start to work through that process of like, well, okay, I get that's scary, right? And there's a part of you that thinks that's really dangerous, but is it dangerous? Let's check the facts on that. And let's actually go through the process of reassuring those parts of us that get really scared so that we can get back to a place of peace and calm where we can make better decisions.
Yeah. I think so much of it too, and maybe you could drill into this, is diet, sleep, and exercise, right? When you start working 80 hours a week, and I've been there many times in my career and probably currently now, no, not quite 80, but pretty high. You start sacrificing things, right? You stay up late, so you sacrifice your sleep, right? Sleep's like the most important. And then you're like, oh, I'll just kind of grab a slice of pizza or a burger instead of having a salad, right? You start going for easy things, and then you start skipping your workouts. You're like, really love to go get a run in or lift some weights, or go play basketball, whatever it is for you. Like, I got too much work, I'm gonna skip it and do work. What are some rules of thumb that founders can follow to make sure they're getting, enough self-care, right?
I think it really comes back to sort of taking the feedback from your feelings as seriously as you take the sort of feedback that you're getting from your employees or your customers or sort of the thoughts in your mind. Because I think that a lot of tech people, we have this very, sort of head focused life of the mind, right? We're thinking everything through to the nth degree. You've got all these very smart, motivated people, but we're totally ignoring this incredible source of feedback, which is how we feel day to day. Because these things you're describing, right? The sleep, the exercise, the diet, these are things that if you're listening to how you feel, your body's giving you very clear feedback, right? Like, how do you feel after the salad versus eating a whole pizza, right? Probably if you eat the whole pizza, you feel pretty bad, right? But if we're not listening to that feedback and actually taking that into account and saying, gosh, like maybe I'm just eating the pizza because I'm stressed out. But actually, like if I start, working on this stuff and actually, relieving my stress in other ways, I actually feel better if I eat a good mix of foods or whatever it is, or I get that regular exercise. But I think often we're sort of fed the opposite narrative to say, oh, well, to be a founder, you have to be tough and have resilience and not care about any of that stuff and ignore those feelings and just push on forward. And to me, that's really, it's just unsustainable, right? Because, you're an investor. It takes a long time to make a successful company, right?
Not 9 years on average, yeah.
Yeah. So to make it 9 years, you're going to need to find a sustainable lifestyle if you're going to run that company. And that's, if you're ignoring your feelings, you're not going to make it 9 years.
Yeah. For me as a founder, I have non-negotiables. I always get 8 hours of rest. Almost always, I'm a night owl. I go to bed at like midnight and wake up at 8 a.m. Much to the chagrin of my wife. She wants me to wake up earlier. I'm like, no, I'm staying up late. I'm waking up at 8. I always get 2 meditations in every day. I do transcendental meditation. And I always get a workout in almost every day. I got a tonal upstairs at my house. So I go up there and do 20, 30 minutes of lifting weights. And then the only way I can get myself to run is play basketball. So I go play basketball, which I'll do today, usually 2 or 3 times a week. So these are all non-negotiables. I always do them. Try to eat well, right? Not always. I have kids, but, that sustainable lifestyle allows me to work basically 6.5 days a week. Now, I don't always work, 10, 12-hour days. I'm working, 8:30 to 5:30. And then Saturday I'll work, another 5, 6, 7 hours. And then Sunday even I'll probably work 4 hours. But I'm able to do that and not burn out because I have the non-negotiables, right? The diet, sleep, and exercise, meditation, and it helps me, personally just kind of maintain that pace. Because I'm doing exactly what I'll do for the rest of my life. And so I gotta figure out how to do it sustainably. Because, like most founders, you're all in, right? You just work as hard as you can, and you'll burn yourself out,
Well, and I don't know if you feel this way, but part of what I find can be helpful in terms of finding that sort of routine that you're talking about, or the, people love that genre of advice. It's like, what's the morning routine of the really successful people, right? And I find that it's less about, sort of duplicating someone else's routine and more about finding what's a routine you actually want to follow. Because I think often, again, the narrative is like, oh, you have to discipline yourself.
You got to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. 4 o'clock morning, ice bath, run, And if you like the ice bath, great. Like, go for it.
Great. Yeah. If you'd like waking up early, go for it. But I mean, I don't. I like to stay up late, and I know that about myself, and everybody's different, right? But you got to find that sustainable routine that's the discipline, right? It's the repeatable, sustainable time spent on different things.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so funny, that people think, discipline is about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. And I feel like it's more the opposite. It's like having the patience to find the things you do want to do, right? For me, it's tennis. I'm obsessed with tennis. I can't stop playing tennis. So I have no problem getting out, getting as much workout as I need because I want to do it. I'll take every opportunity I can.
Yeah, basketball, I play every day. But now in my mid-40s, I can barely play every 2 or 3 days, without taking ibuprofen. But anyway, let's shift to navigating leadership challenges. Tell me about some of the types of founders you run across, and what are some blind spots they have in this area?
Sure. So, I mean, of course, everyone is individual, and I think every founder has their own story and journey. But I think, broadly, I think two archetypes that can be useful to talk about are what I call control freaks and people pleasers. And I like these because they're kind of these archetypes everyone knows, right? Everybody knows a control freak, or we are a control freak. Everyone knows a people pleaser, they are a people pleaser. And often we have both, right? Like we inhabit those archetypes like at different times or with different people in our lives. And I think that, really for me, both of these are sort of coping mechanisms, right? They're saying like when I'm stressed or when I'm in that fight or flight mode, like this is my go-to coping mechanism to say, all right, when I'm scared, I'm going to try and control the situation, right? I'm the control freak. Or when I'm scared, I'm going to try and make sure everyone likes me, right? And that's how I feel safe. And so, the reason people fall into these things is because they're effective, right? But they're effective only in the short term, right? It's like, okay, that helps you feel safe, for that moment, but it doesn't necessarily move you towards those long-term goals. And so usually what I'm working with people on is just in being more self-aware about these patterns and just getting more skillful at shifting themselves out of that mode to say, yeah, okay, like, I want to do this thing. I'm a little scared of how the person's going to react. I'm feeling a little people-pleasy, but can I acknowledge that discomfort and move through it anyway, right? Because the solution is not that we never get scared anymore. No, we're human beings. We're going to get scared. It's more, can I identify that the fear's not that bad and I can move through it anyway? And the more we can experiment with that, the more we can expand our what they call window of tolerance or comfort zone with doing this. And that's how we go from feeling pretty constrained of like, oh, I have to keep myself small, to being able to really be as big as you want to be and go for the things you want in life.
How do you know if you're a people pleaser?
I think I think
asking for a friend.
I mean, they're archetypes. So of course, I think some people are not going to resonate with either one. But I think either way, you know what your own patterns are. I am both for sure. I definitely use both.
I think one of the best frameworks on leadership or management that I ever learned was SL2. You're probably familiar with it.
No, do tell.
Situational leadership. It's basically like a 2x2 quadrant, and you're trying to assess in the individual. Are they able to do this or not? Do they have the skills, right? And then are they motivated or not? And it's basically this quadrant of like, okay, what kind of style of management do I need in this situation, based on are they motivated and are they able? Are they skilled enough to do this, right? And so like if they're not skilled but they're motivated, you can have it more directive management style. If they're highly motivated and highly skilled, you just delegate and get out of the way, right? That's the best kind of management, right? But there's other times where people they're unmotivated to do the thing, even though they're skilled. So they're kind of like, maybe they're burnt out, maybe they're, they need a new job, a new project, something they're excited about. And so it was this really useful framework I learned at Microsoft, managing people. I definitely bring that out a lot.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Although, what I'll say about, sort of that question of like, that more directive management style versus the hands-off management style, like to me, like part of what I share with folks who are, learning to ask for what they want from their reports, because you'd be surprised, right? Like how many people, like they have a direct report, they've hired to do the job, and they feel hesitant to actually ask them to do their job, right? And so I think often what people struggle with is that they've had so many managers where the asks feel coercive, right? In the sense that, no, you better go and do this. Like, go and do it now. Even if it's couched in slightly nicer terms, it can feel like, no, you better go do this now. And I find, like, given that, like, we can't actually control anyone else, we can't force anyone to do anything, really a more effective mode of asking is really asking with great humility, right? Of saying, like, yeah, like, I can't force you to do anything, but here's what I want, here's my expectations. And in the case of a managerial relationship, especially, here's what the consequences are, right? Because I think often the reason we're more responsive to, sort of more directive management from our boss is because, yeah, they can fire you if you're not responsive to them. But even in that scenario, you want it to be this consensual relationship. You don't want, the sort of direct report to be hostage to the manager. Like, even though that is a potential consequence, you still want to be asking in this sort of more humble style, because you want it to be a sort of consensual working relationship.
Yeah, it's more collaborative than directive, right? You kind of want to say, hey, we had a OKR, we had this goal, and we talked about the plan and how's the plan coming? How's that going? Rather than, hey, I need that on my desk by 5 o'clock Tuesday or whatever. That's, nobody wants that.
Yeah, well, and especially when people disagree, right? I think that we often have a pretty argumentative culture in the tech world and the startup world, right? And so the instinct is to say, here's why I'm right. Here's all the data I brought. Here's the A/B tests. Here's what I pulled from the database. Here's the influencer article I read. Here's all the reasons why I'm right and you're wrong, right? And and of course, bringing data is useful, but I think when we're trying to influence other people, coming into the conversation with the assumption that you're an idiot, all of your arguments are wrong, and I'm right, I'm so smart, right? Like that's a really terrible way to build a strong relationship. And yet it's so normalized to be like, oh yeah, every discussion I'm going to say all the reasons they're wrong and I'm right. As opposed to saying like, oh yeah, like I'm curious what you have to say, what data you're bringing. I've got all this data I'm bringing. Let's figure it out together, right? It doesn't have to be a one person wins, one person.
Right. Yeah, the combative style is so easy to fall into, and you see this there's a phrase, startups are terrible places to work, and it's funny because I've seen a lot of people leave the cocoon of Microsoft or Amazon, and I came out of startups, right? And you'll hear, and my wife was at LinkedIn, and you hear these stories of people going to startups and they're just not having a great time. Why do you think startups are such a hard place to work?
I think for me, it's really about the uncertainty, right? That, again, like every job is uncertain, everyone's life is uncertain. But I think we get to fool ourselves into saying like, oh yeah, like, okay, Microsoft's probably not going to go out of business in the time that I'm working there, right? Like their business model is pretty solid.
Yeah. You might get laid off, but yeah, it's not going out of business. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you might get laid off, but like, all right, my LinkedIn's good enough. Probably I can get another job. So we can sort of tell ourselves this story that there's not really any risk or any uncertainty in our life. And of course, the result is that when we do get laid off, right, like when uncertainty inevitably reasserts itself into our lives, we freak out. We're like, oh, this is terrible. I certainly did. The first time I got laid off, I worked at Adobe for a long time. And I think that, what I've learned in the intervening years is to remind myself that, yeah, that uncertainty is inevitable. And that, yeah, there's only so much time that it's going to, the status quo is going to maintain. And so I think when you work in a startup, that level of uncertainty is just so much higher.
Well, and then the culture kind of flows down from the execs, right? Specifically the founders and the CEO. And in that uncertainty, they're uncertain, right? They're like, oh crap, we have 5 months of runway and I'm out fundraising and it's not going well. And so you start, not having a supportive style, a collaborative style. You start having a more directive, like on my desk by Tuesday, 5 p.m. style. And everybody feels that pressure and then it becomes a bad place to work. And then paradoxically, you shoot yourself in the foot and create a bad culture unintentionally because you're so stressed out from all of the, all the things we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that is exactly what I did as a first-time founder, right? I'd been used to these chill jobs at Adobe where nothing was make or break, right? Like I was not going to break Adobe's business model.
Yeah. You got 6 months to launch this thing,
Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'd staked my reputation on this new company and new idea, and I was very unchill. The chillness evaporated immediately.
No chill, Kenneth.
No chill, Kenneth. Exactly. And yeah, I taught myself a number of lessons as a result, right? And yeah, I mean, now I say, my key for people who report to a CEO or a founder is to say, if you don't understand how your CEO is behaving, imagine that you're terrified all the time.
Yeah. You ever worked with anybody who's terrified? Yeah. A founder.
Yeah. A lot of them are terrified all the time, and their behavior might make a lot more sense if you looked at it from that lens.
That's funny. That's really funny. So how can founders combat that? So we talked about burnout, and now you got this low level or high level fear too about failure. How do you overcome that as a CEO and build a supportive and effective team?
Well, I mean, burnout, to me, burnout and fear are really like one and the same, right? Burnout is what happens when you're living in fear all the time and you're not questioning that fear, right? And you're sort of believing that all your fears are real. And so, step number one there is to sort of recognize that fear is present, be like, man, like I'm really terrified, right? and to start checking of like, yeah, like how real are these things? And I think that once we start realizing, oh gosh, like maybe some of these fears aren't as real as they feel in the moment, that's like where we can really start on the road to healing. I'm a big fan of this psychotherapy technique called internal family systems. And it uses the metaphor of parts, right? When we talk about part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way, part of me thinks this, part of me thinks that. And so that can be a really useful technique because I think that's often the way it shows up is we say, oh, part of me is really excited to push forward on this initiative. And part of me is terrified and thinks that it's not safe to do that. And, we should fire our VP of marketing and hire a new VP of marketing.
Oh, it's always the marketing exec who goes first, by the way.
Exactly.
That's another joke, another business joke for you guys.
Poor marketing.
The lowest tenure of any exec in all of business is the marketing exec. Poor marketing.
And so what we work on with these folks is, right, instead of believing that fearful part, to say, to actually bring some compassion, right? And imagine like, when you've got a kid who's like afraid of the dark or afraid of like monsters in the closet. You don't come in being like, all right, we're going to hunt down that monster. You're like, yeah, I have compassion for your fear, but I'm not going to tell you the monster is real. We both know the monster is not real. And so there's a way in which you can find that balance of both reinforcing that the danger is not as great as it seems and bringing real compassion. Be like, hey, buddy, like, of course you're scared. You're a CEO, you're a founder. This shit is hard, but we can get through this, right? We can tolerate the fear and move forward in an effective way.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about delegation and trust. How do you identify this in the founders you work with, and what are some tidbits to wet the palate there?
Well, I think that's another, area control tends to come up, right? Because, sort of different ways it can manifest, right? I think some folks will actually ask for help of like, oh, I'm trying to delegate, I don't know how. Or maybe it'll be more of a feedback issue, right? Of like, oh, I've got this, we can blame the VP of marketing again. The VP of marketing is not performing, they're not doing what I expected. I think it's not working out. And that can actually counterintuitively be really a sort of feedback and delegation issue. Because I think sometimes sort of new managers who don't know about how to sort of spin someone up, especially on a brand new company where there isn't even a sort of defined sales and marketing model, they don't know like how to sort of, work with someone and sort of figure out a positive working relationship. And so really a lot of that becomes saying, hey, like, okay, like you want them to behave this way. Have you asked them? Have you said it out loud? Have you made your expectations clear? And often the answer is no. They're like, oh, well, I don't even believe that, they're going to be able to perform. So I don't want to waste my time. I'm too busy. I don't have time to train someone up. When the reality is, even if you hire someone really senior, if you're at this early stage company, you're going to have to actively build a working relationship. And that includes, working on feedback, working on delegation, sort of building that trust over time. And that's, to me, not a one-size-fits-all thing, but much more a one-to-one human being conversation, right? Where it's less, hey, here's my expectations, go and do it or else. And more like, yeah, how are we going to work together to get this shit done? Because I think once we are viewing the sort of the challenges ahead of us as the sort of challenge or the problem or the enemy and not the sort of person across the table or across the Zoom call, then we start to get to a much more productive place for change.
Let's talk about the power of the great ask, because it's something you mentioned earlier in the call.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working on this book project, Ask for What You Want. And this really comes out of like all my years of coaching, that I've done all sorts of different trainings and different methodologies, from coaching, from psychotherapy, all over the place, read all sorts of books. And it's funny, right? Because I think in the literature around personal development, right, you'll say, the Buddhists say, attachment is suffering, right? And we want to release all attachment and just sort of, be free in the air. And I think a lot of business people like look at something like that and like, that's not for me. Like, I'm running a company. Like, I got venture capitalists telling me I want to hit my numbers by this next quarter. Like, I can't be unattached. And so part of what I'm trying to do here is sort of bridge those two worlds, to say that there actually is a lot of wisdom to, sort of releasing attachment and all this sort of, wisdom from the Buddhists and elsewhere. And how do we bring it into a business environment where we do want things, right? Like, we do have attachment. We do, want our company to be successful and to hit our milestone and to close this customer. And so how do we do that, right? Like go for the things that we want in life and not make ourselves go crazy. And so that's really what, this project is all about. I've got a LinkedIn mailing list and a booking process.
That's awesome. That's great. So what does an effective ask look like?
Well, it's really a kind of iterative multi-step process. So, what I talk about in asking for what you want is step one is articulating what you want, right? And it might sound obvious, but a lot of people haven't actually said out loud or even to themselves, yeah, like, what is it that I want, right? Like maybe we're annoyed or we're complaining, but we haven't actually articulated, okay, I'm annoyed. What's the potential future where that complaint is resolved? And so step one is really around making that clear. Like, okay, like what is it that I want? Like what's my desired outcome? Then step two is about asking for what you want effectively. And that effectively piece is really important because I think a lot of us get really stuck in asking in one particular way, right? Like if you're a people pleaser, maybe you're stuck in not asking at all out loud, right? You just get frustrated, you get scared, you don't say anything, or you ask in a very timid, sort of halfway sort of way. Or if you're a control freak, maybe you ask super loud, super aggressively, super, I'm right and you're wrong. And both of those are pretty ineffective modes of asking. And I think if we give ourselves any self-reflection, we'd be pretty clear on that. And so part of asking effectively is just being really clear on, wait, is this, like, let me be strategic here. Like, is this actually going to motivate this person to give me the sort of the answer that I want? Because mostly the world tells us no, right? Whether it's explicit or implicit, mostly we ask for things of the world and the world tells us no. And so that's really what the third step is about. It's about accepting the response. Because I think so often we assume the answer is no. If we're a people pleaser, we're like, oh, like I'm not even going to bother to ask. Like, I'm just going to give up. Or if we're a control freak, we're like, they can't say no. They're my report. They have to do what I say. And either way, we're not really accepting the no's that the world mostly gives us. And those no's are gold because that's how we learn what's going to be a more effective ask next time, right? And that's why it's an iterative process. Because to me, when I work with clients, it's not like, oh, let's design for 3 months the perfect ask, and then you're guaranteed to get the response you want. No, we're going to be asking every day, every week, and trying out different things to help you expand your range, right? So that you have more tools to ask with and to learn what's effective for you or for the context you're working in or the people that you want to influence. And that's how you empirically start to learn, oh, like I'm getting all these no's, all these different ways, but now I'm starting to get yeses. And these yeses, that's the feedback that I need to actually start to really move towards the place that I want to go. And so that's sort of the process of asking for what you want.
Love it. Why don't we switch to a rapid fire?
Sure.
What's the most common mistake startup founders make?
Believing their fears.
Love that. Can you name a book that every startup leader should read?
15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
I haven't heard of that one. What's your go-to stress relief activity?
Tennis, for sure. I recommend tennis.
Love that. Have you tried pickleball?
I have, but I'm saving that for when I'm 80.
You probably hate it, right? As a tennis person? Yeah.
I don't hate it. I mean, I recognize I will not be able to play tennis forever, but I'm going to play tennis until I'm not able to play tennis.
Yeah, I love pickleball. It's like a little bit bigger ping pong, basically.
Exactly.
How do you define success in your coaching practice?
Ooh, it's a tough one, right? I mean, I think one level is just sort of client satisfaction, right? Like the basics.
Part of you says client satisfaction. No, I'm joking.
Exactly. Part of me says client satisfaction because, of course, I care about that. And I will say for me, really, a lot of it is about helping people be in integrity with themselves and with others.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Yeah, let go of being right.
I like that.
You're not right as much as you think.
No, you're not. I've learned that. How do you balance professional growth with personal well-being?
I don't think of it as a balance. I think of it as one and the same, right? That to me, that's part of how we end up sort of stressing ourselves out is by saying, oh, these things aren't one and the same. But no, like well-being is how you do great work.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the program. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Please find me on LinkedIn, Kenneth Berger, Berger. So feel free to follow, subscribe to the Ask for What You Want newsletter. And if you're interested in coaching, check out my website, kberger.com, Kberger.
Yeah, or listen to the podcast again. I feel like I got a free session of coaching. Thank you so much.
Heck yeah, anytime.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you.